Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're tackling a topic that, let's be totally honest here, tends to strike absolute dread into the hearts of so many people: documentation. I know, right? Staring at a blank page after a super heavy, emotionally draining counseling session, it's just exhausting. You're probably sitting there wondering exactly what you should write down and honestly what you absolutely shouldn't write down. But here's the thing: getting this right is a total game changer. It transforms those messy emotional notes into ethical, biblical documentation. We're going to take the guesswork completely out of your record keeping today, so you can practice with total confidence and peace of mind. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the danger of vague notes, then look at documentation as biblical stewardship. After that, we'll walk through the ethical decision tree, break down how to actually write biblical soap notes, and wrap up with your practice assignment. Let's dive in. Section 1, the danger of vague notes. So, to set the stage here, I want you to picture this. Imagine a counselor who has just finished an incredibly heavy, deeply emotional session. They are just totally wiped out. They sit down at their desk, open up a file, and just start pouring it all out onto the page. They write these massive paragraphs of their own personal opinions, a ton of heavy spiritual labels, and just a whole bunch of unverified third-party accusations that the counselee just made about their spouse. But hidden in those pages of venting, zero concrete facts. I mean, no specific dates are recorded, there's nothing to show safety questions were asked, and absolutely no follow-up plan is documented. When notes are just a massive dump of raw emotions like this, what actually happens? Well, instantly you've created massive spiritual, legal, and ethical hazards for literally everyone involved. You can really see the stark contrast here between doing it the wrong way and what is actually required of us. Take a look at that messy narrative note. It's just full of subjective impressions, right? It reads way more like a personal diary entry than a professional record. Now, look at what is dangerously missing. There are no observable facts. There is absolutely zero record that the counselor screened for risk or physical safety, which is a massive red flag. And there's no concrete plan for the next session either. I mean, imagine if a supervisor or a court of law via a subpoena or even the counselee themselves requested to read this note. They wouldn't see a competent record of care. No, they'd see a highly subjective, biased story that leaves you, the ministry, and the counselee totally unprotected. And this brings us to a really powerful concept from our source material. When we overdocument by throwing in unnecessary third-party details, rampant speculation, and our own personal assumptions, our documentation entirely ceases to be a helpful record. It literally becomes gossip in professional clothing. Seriously, think about it. Putting unverified third-party accusations into a permanent written record without any factual evidence completely violates the biblical mandate to protect the reputations of others. Sure, it might feel like a deeply spiritual reflection in the moment, but legally and ethically, it is deeply, deeply hazardous. Moving right along, Section 2, documentation as biblical stewardship. We really need to completely shift our mindset here. Documentation is not just some annoying administrative burden or secular liability avoidance tactic. Keeping truthful records is actually an act of theological obedience, and we see this woven all throughout Scripture. Proverbs 10:9 reminds us that whoever walks in integrity walks securely. Proverbs 21:15 notes that when justice is done, it's a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. And look at Luke 1:1-4. Luke actually models this for us by compiling an orderly historical record of the facts so that the reader can have certainty about what they were taught. 1 Corinthians 14:40 explicitly tells us that all things should be done decently and in order. 2 Corinthians 8:21 mandates that we take thought for what is honorable, not just in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of man. Colossians 3:9 commands us not to lie to one another. And finally, Revelation 20:12 paints this sobering picture of the end times, reminding us that God himself keeps perfect records, and the dead are judged by what was written in the books. So when you weave all these scriptures together, the mandate is incredibly clear. Keeping accurate, truthful, and orderly records is exactly how we bear truthful witness to the care we provide. The absolute most crucial takeaway here is captured perfectly in this phrase: documentation is ministry memory under discipline. I mean, what a profound way to put it, right? Your notes protect the counselee, they protect you as the counselor, they protect the broader ministry, and above all, they protect the truth. And they do this not by relying on secular clericalism, meaning we aren't just trying to feed some corporate bureaucracy or dodge a lawsuit. Rather, we're engaging in disciplined, faithful stewardship of the facts. All right, Section 3, the ethical decision tree. So here is the real secret to good note-taking. Before you write a single word down, you have to actually make wise decisions about the care you're providing. Ethical discernment is an orderly process, not a panicked reaction. Step 1, identify the issue and the risk. Ask yourself who is actually at risk here. Are there immediate physical safety concerns? Step 2, define your role and the applicable law or policy. Are you acting as a biblical counselor, a licensed clinician, or maybe a lay mentor? What specific consent exists for this relationship? Step 3 is absolutely vital. Seek consultation. You do not have to, and honestly, you really shouldn't, carry heavy legal or ethical burdens in a silo. Talk to a supervisor or a peer. And step 4, name your next steps in your rationale. What did you decide to do, and exactly why did you decide to do it? You figure this entire framework out before you act and long before you finalize your documentation.
Which leads us nicely to Section 4, Writing Biblical Soap Notes.
Now we get to the really practical solution to that messy narrative note we talked about earlier, the biblical soap note. This framework is your absolute gold standard. Let's break down the acronym. S is for subjective. This is the counselor reported experience. You want to use their words, but stick to the facts of what they stated. So, for example, instead of writing, husband was a jerk, you'd write, counselor stated her husband yelled. O is for objective. What interventions did you actually use? What observable actions took place? For instance, if you use scripture, don't just write, read the Bible. Document exactly which passage you explored with their consent, like reviewed Ephesians 4 regarding communication. Then A is for assessment. Describe the observable ministry themes, the risks, the strengths, and any referral needs. You might write something like, counselor exhibited high anxiety when discussing finances. And finally, P is for plan. What are the concrete next steps? Who's responsible for what? What's the homework? An example would be, counselor agreed to read Chapter 2 of the assigned workbook before next Tuesday's session. See, it's clean, it's concise, and it is entirely behaviorally grounded. Now notice this really common but highly dangerous trap we often see, an informal diagnosis. A biblical counsel writes, client is bipolar and narcissistic. Listen, unless you are a legally licensed clinician actively operating within a clinical service lane, this is an unauthorized clinical diagnosis. Doing this opens you and your ministry up to severe legal liability because you are operating wildly outside your scope of practice. You are essentially practicing medicine without a license. Instead, look at how we should be doing it with a ministry formulation. You write, presentation suggests relational distress. Here, you're accurately describing the observable themes and behaviors in the room without stamping the person with a permanent medical label that you simply aren't authorized to give. To wrap up the SOAP framework, there are some absolute minimum standards that have to be met for every single note. You must clearly identify your service lane. You must document that you actively screened for risk, things like suicide or abuse, if those risks are reasonably present in the conversation. You must document any shifts in consent. A shift in consent might happen if you're moving from individual counseling to marital counseling, for example, which requires new agreements. You also have to use scripture accurately, meaning you tie the specific citation to the actual intervention used in the session, rather than just throwing it in as a decorative proof text. And finally, this is a big one. If you realize later that you made a mistake or forgot something, you always record it as a dated addendum. Never, ever go back and alter, erase, or falsify a past record. In a court of law, altering a past document implies a deliberate cover-up, and that will absolutely destroy your credibility. Always use an addendum.
And that brings us to Section 5, your practice assignment.
All right, it's time to bring all of this together and actively apply the transformation we've just explored. For your portfolio artifact this week, your challenge is threefold. First, you're going to take a messy, over-documented narrative note and successfully convert it into a crisp, concise, biblical soap note. Second, you need to explicitly include your ethical and legal reasoning along with proper referral language if the issues present are outside your scope. And third, you'll describe your documentation rule sheet using the sample biblical soap note provided in the course. I promise you, mastering this framework right now is going to make your actual counseling practice infinitely less stressful down the road. And according to your evaluation rubric for this assignment, there are some really clear benchmarks for success. Notice exactly what the excellent column demands. For biblical wisdom, it requires thoughtfully integrating scripture with humility, protection, truth, and lawful care. This means you aren't just throwing around Bible verses as slogans, but using them as genuine, documented tools of care. For documentation, excellence means writing factual, concise, non-diagnostic notes that clearly detail your consultation process and any necessary referral steps. That right there is the absolute gold standard of trustworthy care.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this single, provocative question to think about. How will your documentation bear witness to the truth this week? Remember, your notes aren't just a stack of paperwork to rush through at the end of the day. They are a profound theological mandate. They are ministry memory under discipline. Treat them with the exact reverence they deserve. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.